Okay, so let's take a look here at the infinitives. I want to just say a few introductory comments about the Greek infinitive, and that is this. First of all, you remember how I used to jump up and down and scream and make you repeat after me that participles are verbal adjectives? Well, we now come to the type of verbal form where we can say something slightly different. Infinitives are not verbal adjectives, they are verbal nouns. Just like the participle being a verbal adjective, shared verbal characteristics and adjectival characteristics, the infinitive is a verbal noun, and therefore it can do anything a noun can do, only better. It can function like a noun, but it also has verbal characteristics. Now, when you translate a Greek infinitive, one way that you can do it is to translate it like you do English infinitives. The way to indicate an English infinitive is to use the word to, and then the bare form of the verb, to eat, to drink, to be merry. All right? Sometimes you can translate a Greek infinitive using what's called an English gerund. Now, I just probably lost half of you or more, because you may not remember what a gerund is. In English, we have ing forms that are one of two things. Okay, so if you have a verbal form that in English ends with an ing, that is either a participle or a gerund. Now, that's how you spell gerund. Okay, what do we learn about participles? Well, participles are verbal adjectives. Gerunds are like infinitives, they are verbal nouns. Okay? So let me just jot that down. So a participle is an adjective. A gerund is a noun that ends with ing. So I could refer to the flirting woman. Flirting is what? A participle or a gerund? The flirting woman. It's a participle because it's describing or modifying the woman. But if I said, hey, that woman loves flirting, how is flirting functioning there? It's a noun functioning as the direct object of loves, right? So you see, flirting is the same word with the same ing ending, but that ing ending is doing different things in English. If it's modifying a noun, it's a participle. If it's functioning as a noun, it's a gerund. Okay? And my point here is that English has two kinds of verbal nouns: gerunds, ing forms that function as nouns, or infinitives, to do something. Okay? And so in English, when you're translating a Greek infinitive, you might use an English infinitive to do it, to eat, or you might use an English gerund to do it, eating. So, example here, to eat is fun, or eating is fun. You see how both of these present an action that is functioning like a noun, right? Something is fun. Normally, nouns fill that subject role. Right? Okay. Love is fun. Ice cream is fun. And to eat is fun. Or eating is fun. You could also translate this, if you want to, as the act of eating. Okay? Here, I'm not specifying any particular person's eating, but rather I'm making a comment just about the action itself. Okay? I love a direct object. What's my direct object here? I love to eat, or I love eating. Okay, so in Greek, the Greek infinitive could be the subject or the direct object, and I have different ways that I can translate that in English. Now, let's make another introductory comment here about infinitives. Secondly, infinitives are indeclinable, neuter, singular verbal nouns. They're indeclinable. What does that mean? We learned about some indeclinable nouns when we were first learning nouns, didn't we? If a noun is indeclinable, it does not change its case. Or at least, if it's indeclinable in certain cases, it doesn't have a different form. So the Greek infinitive is not going to change its case at all. There are no different case endings for infinitives for when it's functioning as a subject versus an object or anything like that. All right? The other thing is that infinitives are always neuter singular. They are neuter singular verbal nouns. And so if there's an article, and you can have articles in front of infinitives, the article will always be what gender? Neuter. It will always be ta, and then the infinitive form. And that is almost funny because in English, how do we translate infinitives usually? Yeah, the word to in front of the verbal form. All right? So it is ta plus the Greek infinitive if it's articular. That's neuter singular. All right? So I won't ever have neuter plural forms of the article before an infinitive. Neuter singular. All right? So examples here. Ta balein estin agathon. What do you think the lexical form of that Greek infinitive is? It's balo. That's right. And what does balo mean? To throw. Okay? So ta balein estin agathon means to throw is agathon, good. To throw is good. I'm sure a lot of pitchers would say that, and baseball players. How is this infinitive functioning? It is the subject of the verb estin, right? Notice that my verb is third person singular. Why? Because my subject is neuter singular, right? What is the case of my article here? That's the gender. It's neuter and singular, but is it nominative, accusative, dative, genitive?
Could be either nominative or accusative.
In form, it could be nominative or accusative. But if it's the subject, it is nominative, right? It's nominative. And that's why I have ta here. Okay? On the other hand, if you look over at entobalein, okay, this infinitive with its attendant article is the object of the preposition en. Now, what case does the preposition en require of its object? Dative. So can I make the infinitive itself dative? No, because infinitives are indeclinable. But are the articles that accompany infinitives indeclinable? No, I just asked you a double negative sort of question, right? No, these are not indeclinable. So you will have a dative form of the article. And so look at to here. This is neuter, and it's singular, but it's also dative. For what reason? Because en requires the dative case for its object. Okay? So everybody see how that works. Infinitives do not change their form to mark case, but their articles do. But the article is always neuter singular. Now, when I have the preposition en plus a dative, it's usually temporal, and you would translate it as when or while. So in this case, while throwing, using that gerund is probably the best way to do it. Or in the act of throwing would be the idea, right? In meaning during the act of throwing. Okay. Now, third point. Because the infinitive is a verbal noun, not only can it perform the functions of a noun, subject, direct object, object of the preposition, but it can also take direct objects and other verbal modifiers like adverbs and prepositional phrases. So up here, I use the example of eating. To eat is fun, right? A simple infinitive. To eat is fun. But look at what I've done in this next example. To eat cookies and cream slowly and deliberately in bed is fun. Now, this whole thing functions how? As the subject. Something is fun. What's fun? This entire infinitive phrase is the subject. The infinitive itself is just to eat. But notice that the infinitive takes a compound direct object, right? Cookies and cream, plus an adverb, and another adverb, and a prepositional phrase. All of these things are governed by the infinitive. To eat something in particular ways in a particular place, doing all of that is fun. Okay? So, yes, infinitives are verbal nouns. And they can do what nouns can do, but they're a lot better than nouns because they can take a lot of other things too. I'll also point out that the verbal side of the infinitive as a verbal noun means that when you have an infinitive, there are other verbal characteristics like tense stem. Nouns don't have tense stems, right? Nouns have noun stems, but participles and infinitives have to make tense stem choices, and because that's part of their verbal nature. And you have to make a choice about voice. Do I use the active form, the middle form, the passive form? Okay? So we're going to see those sorts of things along with our infinitives as well. So let's talk about how to form the Greek infinitive, shall we? Okay. Now, I'm going to make some comments about the chart that's right here, okay? The following chart indicates what you are to add to the tense stem for the various types of infinitives. So, first of all, this is just a reminder of which tense stems are used for which tenses. And then, assuming this information, you're going to add the information in the chart below to the tense stem that we're talking about. So let's just remind ourselves, to form the present active, middle, and passive infinitive, you're going to use a particular tense stem based on your 6-column tense stem chart. Which tense stem do we use? We always use the present stem. Which column is that? It's the first one, so I'm going to just put a number 1 here, okay? The aorist active and the aorist middle infinitive uses the aorist active stem. That is, which column? That's the third. The aorist active indicative is in column 3, and the aorist active and the aorist middle use that stem. Okay? Now, in the Greek infinitive, the aorist active and middle infinitives will use that stem without the augment. Why is there no augment on the aorist active infinitive? Because it's not absolute past time. Remember, once we're outside of the indicative mood, and infinitives and participles have no mood, the subjunctive is a different mood, right? These are forms that are unaugmented in the aorist tense stem. All right? So, unaugmented, they're using the aorist stem. Aorist passive infinitives will use the aorist passive stem, but no augment. Which column is that? That's the last one, which would be number 6. Okay, the perfect active infinitive is going to be built off of the perfect active stem. What column is that? That's number 4. That's right, cuatro. And there will be reduplication, because reduplication is not an augment. Okay, the perfect always has it, no matter what. And then the perfect middle passive infinitive is going to be built off of the perfect middle passive stem with reduplication before the stem. What column is that? Number 5. Number 2 is the future, right? Number 2 is the future. All right. So those are the infinitive stems, okay? This is nothing new, by the way. This is true for the participles. This is true for the subjunctive, right? Except we don't have subjunctive perfects, but and the indicatives. Now, so take a look at the chart now, okay? Now, in the chart, I have some abbreviations. CV, you know, stands for connecting vowel. So after the stem in the present, so I've got a present column here, and then going down, it's active, middle, and passive. I'm going to use the present stem of luo, for example. It would be what? It'd be lu, right? And to lu, I'm going to add a connecting vowel. What are my 2 connecting vowels? Omicron and epsilon. What's the rule about when I use which? Omicron before mu, or nu. Epsilon, everywhere else. Okay, so which of those two connecting vowels would I use if I'm adding N after the connecting vowel? I'm going to use epsilon. Okay, so epsilon plus epsilon nu is going to yield a contraction, right? And it'll be ain. Ain. So luane ends up being the form. How would I translate that? It would be something like the act of loosing, or to loose, or just loosing as a verbal noun. Loosing is fun. The middle and the passive are identical to each other. They're going to take the same connecting vowel because I don't have a mu or nu after it. So lu plus the connecting vowel, and then this ending sthai. Sthai. Okay, so luasthai. In the middle meaning, to loose or to loose for oneself. Passive, to be loosed. To be loosed. Now, for the first aorist, what am I going to do? I'm going to use my first aorist, or my aorist stem, which is that column 3, and luo as my example. It's going to be lu. But I'm going to use a tense formative now after that aorist stem. And it's unaugmented, by the way. So lu, sa. Isn't it nice that my aorist tense formative gets to be the whole sigma alpha that I learned when I first learned the aorist? So lu, sa. And then for the aorist active, it's going to be an iota after the sa. So loosai. Loosai. So to loose. But in the present, the aspect is imperfective. To loose, thinking or construing it as something ongoing or progressive or habitual. First aorist, loosai, to loose, viewing the action as a perfective thing, as a complete or whole action, without regard to its internal unfolding. So the aorist middle, just like the aorist active, always uses the sa with its first, but I'm using the middle passive morpheme here, right? So sthai. So lu, sa, sthai. To loose for oneself, if you want to use that expression for the middle. And then for the first aorist passive, I get to use the good old theta eta tense formative. We're used to that, aren't we? Eluthane, right? For I was loosed. So theta eta followed by the ending nai for the first aorist passive. Lu, the, nai. To be loosed. To be loosed. All right. Remember, when I have a tense formative that ends with a vowel, what do I not need anymore? I don't need connecting vowels, do I? All right. Now, remember, second aorists are characterized by not having what? Yeah, they don't have the first, something that the first aorist has. For the second aorist, active and middle, they are characterized by no sigma alpha tense formative. Instead, what do they use? They use connecting vowels. Just to go back and remind ourselves, if we take balo as our example, the second aorist active indicative was ba, lan, right? I augment. I have ball. That's a second aorist stem. The present stem has 2 lambdas. Aorist stem has 1. And then a connecting vowel followed by a personal ending, right? And no sigma alpha here. So I'm going to take something like ball, if that's my second aorist, and I'm going to add an epsilon followed by an epsilon nu, and it's going to be balane. Balane. How can I tell the difference between a second aorist and a present? The stem's always different from each other, right? So for the aorist middle, I get the connecting vowel but no tense formative, and then the sthai ending. And then remember, second aorist passives are like first aorist passives, except the theta's missing. So I get the eta without the theta, but the same nai in both. Balo does not use a second aorist passive, but grapho does. So Gra, fe, nai would be the way to write that as a second aorist. And I accidentally put a phi here. That should have been a gamma. So gra, fe, nai, to be written. All right. And then for the perfect forms, we'll use the perfect stem, but with what? With reduplication. Le, lu. And then I'm going to add these endings. Ke, nai. Here, not kappa alpha, but kappa epsilon. So you were thinking, I'm using all of my normal things here, but alas, the perfect is not so perfect. Kappa epsilon rather than the kappa alpha of the indicative. And then that nai ending, which you've already seen over here, right? So kenai, lelu kenai, to have loosed, active. Middle and passive are identical. I'm going to do what? If you remember, the perfect middle passive is le, lu, mai. Reduplicate, perfect stem, but no connecting vowels and no tense formatives. I go straight to the middle passive endings. Same thing here. No tense formatives, no connecting vowels. I go from le, lu straight to the sty. Le, lu, sty. To have loosed for oneself, if it's middle. If it's passive, to have been loosed. Okay? So the endings are going to look like this. Ain, esthi, and esthi, when you put those connecting vowels in. First aorist, psi, sasthi, thanai. Second aorist, ain, esthi, and ani. And the perfect, kenai, sthi, and sthi. What do you notice about all of these forms except for the present active infinitive, the second aorist active infinitive? They all end with what? I. You see the I? The I's have it, right? You guys, if you all see it, say I. Are there any no's? Good. The I's are above the nose. Alrighty. So all the infinitives have an I ending except for those two yellow ones there. Okay. When we plug everything in, and we're not going to relitigate this, I'll just have you look at the forms now. So the present forms, active, middle, and passive, are everybody, repeat after me, luain, luesthi, and luesthi. The first aorist forms, lusai for active, lusasthi, and luthanai. All right. Second aorist, labain, labesthi, graphenai. Grapho uses a second aorist passive. And then the perfect, lelukenai, lelusthai, lelusthai. Alrighty. Are there any questions about the formation of these infinitives? All right. If not, let's move on. Let's look at semantics and the subjects of the infinitive. Semantics has to do with meaning. When we choose to use an infinitive, or when a Greek speaker uses an infinitive, remember, since the infinitive is not an indicative mood form, the choice of present, aorist, or perfect stem for the infinitive is not a matter of tense or timing. It's a matter of aspect. We're dealing with the semantics of aspect here. All right? So if a present stem infinitive is used, it doesn't mean that the infinitive's activity is happening at the present. It means that the activity is imperfective. It's not being viewed as a completed action, but rather in terms of its internal procedural characteristics as it unfolds through time. If it's the aorist stem, then it's perfective. It's viewing the action as a bounded whole, viewing the action as a complete action without regard to its unfolding in time. And then if it's the perfect stem, then the action is viewed as completed, but with some ongoing relevance, usually relative to the timing of the main verb. Now, 3.2. Since the infinitive is not technically a finite verb, it doesn't have personal endings like finite verbs do. The present active indicative has, remember, 6 different forms depending on whether the subject is first person singular or third person singular, right? We don't have finite verbs here with the infinitive. By the way, the in the word infinitive means what? Not. So it's not a finite verb. It doesn't mark person and number. And because of that, infinitives technically don't have subjects. But there can be a conceptual or an understood subject of an infinitive. And if the subject is ever made overt in Greek, that subject is going to be in a case that you do not expect. What do we normally expect our subject's case to be? Nominative. But when we have a subject overtly given for an infinitive, it will be in the accusative case. And that is going to be hard to get used to. I'm just going to admit that right now. It's hard to get used to that. You read enough Greek, you'll get used to it. All right? Now, if the infinitive has both a subject and a direct object overtly given, then you're going to have 2 accusative nouns. And then you're going to have to do a little bit of thinking to determine which one of these accusative nouns is the subject and which one is the direct object. But if you're reading the text in Greek and you read what came before that particular sentence or clause with those 2 accusative nouns and an infinitive, it won't be too hard to figure it out. All right? Luke 2:27, Mounce provides this in his grammar. Look at what we've got. Kai ento eis agagein tus ganes ta paidian Yesun. Let's first of all identify the infinitive. Do you see it? Eis agagein. That's our infinitive, right? Do you see that ain ending? Most of our infinitives are going to end with I, but this is one that ends with ain. And then you may not remember this word or even know it, but you've got an article in front of it. Tous ganes. It's the word parents, but what case do you think tous ganes is? It's accusative, right? You see the article is your friend here. This is accusative, plural, and masculine. Ta paidian Yesun is the child Jesus. This is neuter in form, so it could be nominative or accusative, but Yesun can only be what? Accusative, because the nominative of Yesun is Jesus with the sigma at the end. Okay? So altogether, these are accusative singular masculine. Okay? This is accusative plural masculine. So I've got 2 different accusative participants along with this infinitive. Now, eis agagein is from eis ago, to bring. Okay? So literally, and in the bringing, the parents, the child Jesus. Which one is the subject? Who's doing the bringing? Probably the parents. This is the presentation of Jesus at the temple. Okay? Jesus, as almighty as he is not bringing his parents to the temple for presentation. It's the parents doing it. Okay? So 2 accusative nouns. This one's the subject. This one's the direct object. Frequently, the first one will be the subject and the second one will be the direct object. Okay? But you don't even have to think about the word order, honestly. If you know what the words mean, it'll usually be abundantly clear, given the context and the meaning of the words. All right? That makes sense? Okay. So, and by the way, as we said, when you have n plus an infinitive, that's temporal. So, when, this is the way you would want to translate this, when the parents brought the child Jesus. Okay? All right. 3.3. Negation of infinitives. You can not only say to do something, but you can also speak about not doing something. Okay? To not eat is fun? No, To not eat is not fun, right? How in Greek do we say to not eat? Well, we don't use ou. Remember, ou is used to negate indicative mood verbs. If we're going to negate anything that's not an indicative mood verb, we use may, okay? So use may, not only to negate participles and subjunctives, but infinitives as well, all right? So Romans 7:3, here's a nice example for us. If apathane ha-aner, if the husband dies. Now notice, by the way, aeon is going to introduce a conditional clause. What mood will its verb be in? Subjunctive. And so look at my eta, that's the lengthened epsilon, and there's the iota, right? So the indicative would be epsilon iota. The lengthened connecting vowel would be eta iota, okay? So if the husband should die, eleuthera esten, we're talking about a wife, she is free, apatunamu, from the law, tu me enai altain moichalida. Now, she is free from the law, and here I have an article with the infinitive, okay? These go together, but it's being negated. This articular infinitive is genitive case, and this is used for result in this case. Sometimes the genitive articular infinitive can indicate purpose. Sometimes it can indicate result. I would take this one as result. She is free with the result that, and here I have an accusative feminine noun, and then I have an accusative feminine noun, so that she not be moichalida. She is free with the result that she is not an adulteress. Okay? Now, most of our English translations will say so that she is not an adulteress. All right, so this is the subject of this infinitive, which means to be. And this is the, well, what do we call this? When we have a verb of being, usually my subject is what case? Nominative. And then the predicate noun or adjective will be nominative. But when we have the infinitive to be, the subject will be accusative, and then the predicate will be accusative as well. And again, this is hard to get used to, but you will. You'll see it frequently enough. So, she not be an adulteress, having been married to another man. Okay? Or although she is married to another man, or becomes another man's. Alrighty.